The regular season is over. We are going to react to the Week 18 shenanigans, probably run in a gratuitous touchdown on Arthur Smith in the process, and talk a little bit about the Jaguars. All coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Regular season is done. The playoffs are starting up. We'll do our fantasy football player drafts this week, playoff drafts this week. But right now we're here to recap everything that did happen in Week 18. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Nick, I'm sorry. I don't have to ask you how you're doing. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry. I should have lit a candle for this. I could probably do it on air. I got a candle within reach, so it's a mandel. Anyhow, sorry about your Jaguars. Tough finish to the season.
You know, I'm at peace with it. I really am. I went in with low expectations, as I advise anyone who has any emotional investment in the Jacksonville Jaguars to do. So I was kind of mentally preparing myself for the worst case scenario. You know, I was watching the game with some friends. I was, trying to prepare everyone for what they were about to see. And, it kind of started early on, right? I mean, Tennessee on their first drive of the game, right after Jacksonville goes down, puts together a nice 11-play drive for a field goal. You'll take it. 7 plays later, Tennessee marches down the field for their first touchdown of the game. And I think that set the tone, and that set the alarm bells off if you were a Jaguar supporter, realizing that, okay, maybe we're not going to see the carryover that we thought we might from what this defense looked like last week against Carolina. The run defense obviously completely collapsed. Derrick Henry, starting the second half with that 69-yard run to basically hand another touchdown to Tennessee. He goes 19 for 153, one of his better games of the entire season. We saw Derrick Henry, speaking to the fans on the Jumbotron after the game. Certainly seems like a guy who realizes his time in Tennessee might be up. Will be very interesting to see if that is ultimately the case, where he goes, what kind of role is he in going forward. But really on the Jacksonville side of things, this is about what I expected, to be honest. Trevor Lawrence looked awful. He made like 5 terrible throws in a row to end this game. Really, other than the deep ball to Calvin Ridley, which was their one explosive on the day, he didn't look great. And, obviously I'm disappointed in this result. With that said, even if the Jaguars won this game, I think it was pretty clear that this team wasn't going to do anything in the postseason. They were probably going to get bounced in round 1. So that's the silver lining, at least what I'm telling myself. The far bigger issue is that all the momentum that this team felt like it had built over the last calendar year is now gone. It's fair to now question, like, is Trevor Lawrence even the guy? I mean, you're going into his 4th year now, and it kind of feels like this is all of a sudden a prove-it season for a guy who showed enough last year, showed enough early this season that I remember when we were on air, Jeff, for that Jags-Bengals game, and they kept saying the Jaguars franchise quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, he's their franchise guy. I still think he is, but, man, it's like if somebody asked you straight up, hey, who would you rather have, Jordan Love or Trevor Lawrence going forward? Is anybody taking Trevor Lawrence right now?
Not after the way Love looked down the stretch, and including yesterday again against a previously fearsome Bears defense. Love looked great. We'll get to that in a second, but I'm willing to kind of give a little bit of a pass to Lawrence because he played the last month and a half basically hurt. Is clearly he's compromised. I mean, the fact that he's hasn't had a full practice really since the Bengals game. Since he did, I think since then it's just been, I think, almost a giant write-off on the offensive side of things. Kirk got hurt on the first play of that game too, and that was a massive play for the rest of the Jaguar season. I'm kind of concerned more about what happened to the defense. And to be honest with you there, they were previously a fearsome run defense, and Henry gashed them all day. Their pass defense has been awful for a while now. They have a great pass rush. Josh Allen has had an incredible year. But the secondary took a step backward. I'm concerned about that. I think the offensive line, the run game also really took a step backward too. And I think the offensive line, that's going to be an area that they need to address in the offseason as well.
I think this roster was kind of a paper tiger in some ways. I think it looks good. And then, 2 or 3 key pieces get hurt, which is going to happen to every team over the course of the NFL season. I think the Jags' lack of depth got exposed pretty quickly. Yeah, and, I agree. This is a team that's, it's been an issue for this franchise for a long time, well before Doug Peterson or Trevor Lawrence showed up. I mean, they're they're a team that when things go bad, they tend to spiral. And when things are good, they kind of let the good times roll, but they cannot really pick themselves up when the offense starts to sputter, when the defense starts to sputter. They just kind of do the same thing every single week. And we basically heard Trevor Lawrence say that, after the game yesterday. It's like, this is like 7 weeks in a row where we keep saying, all right, this is the week we're going to rediscover it. And they just never did. They never did. And it certainly felt, watching this game, the Jags had multiple opportunities, thanks in large part to a terrible interception by Ryan Tannehill in the fourth quarter. Threw it right to Andre Cisco in the middle of the field, gifting the Jaguars an opportunity to score and tie this game. They get all the way to the 1 yard line. Trevor Lawrence, audibles to the, Superman over the top play on fourth down. They were too far out for that. They're at like the 2.5 yard line. And like the play technically worked. Lawrence just couldn't quite reach far enough despite his size and despite his reach. They came up like 2 inches short of what would have been a touchdown. But to me, that's more emblematic of the Jags just not having anything in the red zone, not having anything in short yardage situations in general. Third down, they try to run some sort of, play action.
Yes.
There's just nothing there. Lawrence has to throw it away. And that's just that's what the offenses look like in the red zone all year. It's like they do not have a running back who they feel, even with 2 opportunities, because obviously that was 4 down territory, they don't feel comfortable handing it off to ETN or Bigsby because they know they're not going to get a push.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's not a shortcoming of the running back, by the way. That's a shortcoming of the offensive line. And I just, again, it all stems from that. Yeah, and I agree. Like the play call sequence there, especially an RPO with Lawrence, when I mean, you shouldn't have him running outside trying to take on a tackler there with a bad shoulder and a bad ankle and all the other, Frankenstein thing he has going on there. And there was like one receiver in the pattern. It was just a brain dead call. So the follow-up question then is, do you recommend change? Should there be a coaching change, a coordinator change, GM change?
There should have been a GM change years ago. I don't know that the Jags really do anything here. I mean, Press Taylor, the play caller and kind of the right-hand man for Doug Peterson, I think he has been the target of the pitchforks for Jags Nation all season. And certainly that, yesterday didn't do anything to ease those concerns. So I do think it's kind of similar to the Joe Barry, Matt LaFleur relationship where, LaFleur has been so loyal to Joe Barry. Peterson has been extremely loyal to Press Taylor dating back to the Philadelphia Eagles days. I certainly don't think Doug Peterson's job is really in jeopardy. I think it might be in jeopardy going into next season. And if they win 7 or 8 games again, then yeah, he's going to be on his way out. But if I was the owner of the Jaguars, which hopefully someday I will be, I would say, look, Doug Peterson, we want you back. Press Taylor's not calling the plays, man. This was a complete disaster all season. There was even confusion at times over, Peterson claimed he was calling the plays sometimes. Press Taylor was calling the plays for one half, Peterson calling the plays for the other. Like, but I don't know how you think that's going to be successful. So the play calling is number one. Obviously, addressing the offensive line is number 2. And, I think just building out a roster of more depth, right? I mean, that to me is the biggest, the number one issue the Jaguars have is they kind of stood pat in free agency for the most part. They made a trade for Ezra Cleveland at the deadline to beef up their offensive line. Didn't seem to matter. The offensive line got worse actually since he showed up. So I think there's a little bit of hubris with how they finished last season, thinking, all right, well, we're good. We're automatically going to take another step forward because we're an ascending young team. Right. And I think when you go into a season with that somewhat entitled mindset, this is exactly what's going to happen. And I mean, now they go into next season as what? Second, maybe even the third best team in their own division with the way that Houston and Indy have closed.
Yeah. And to your point too, about like injuries happen, depth gets exposed. Look down the road. Look at Houston. I mean, they had 13 guys on on the offensive line that were hurt. 13 guys on IR, I think, at one point in time. They overcame. They won a game with Case Keenum starting at quarterback in division at Tennessee. That's the difference.
Yeah. Well, and that's the last thing I'll say on the Jags. We don't need to bore the listeners anymore. We can keep running through this slate. I know we don't want to go for 2 hours today, but I think that's what's really frustrating is there are other teams in your own division, let alone the rest of the NFL, who have had worse injury luck than you, who on paper have worse talent than you, and have still performed better than you, right? I mean, Houston has less depth in theory than the Jaguars do, and yet with all those guys on IR, with their entire offensive line banged up, with half of their defensive line missing games down the stretch, they didn't really miss a beat, and Jacksonville, it feels like missing two key players out of 22 starters, your entire team shouldn't really crumble in the way that they did.
Yeah, Christian Kirk being one of them should not be that huge of a difference maker.
Very good player. All due respect to Christian Kirk. He should not, your entire offense should not hinge on the health of Christian Kirk.
Right.
That's a problem.
Indeed. All right, let's move on. Let's talk Houston Indy. And we probably won't hit every single game. We'll vary a little bit in our format this time, just because nobody really needs to hear us break down Denver and the Raiders here. I mean, no one really cares about that. Houston Indy, huge game for CJ Stroud. First play of the offensive play of the game for them. Bam, 75-yard touchdown to Nico Collins. Went for 120 more after that. Collins did. I mean, he was the only receiver out there really that got more than 9 yards. Dalton Schultz had in the 40s, but I'm talking wide receivers. I mean, Robert Woods did nothing. Noah Brown didn't even play. Obviously, no Tank Dell. Here they are. Bam. They're in the playoffs. First year under CJ Stroud, first year under D'Amico Ryans. I mean, hats off to them.
Hats off to Goodson for dropping that pass on fourth down that ultimately sealed it for Houston. I mean, throwing a little bit behind him, obviously, but you still think you got to bring that one in. I mean, that unfortunately robbed us of what would have been a really fun final sequence. And in Indianapolis, I kind of admire their discipline. I mean, I think they ran the ball 7 times in a row prior to that fourth down call. And it was the right call. I mean, it was wide open, right? If he just brings that in and even falls to the ground, you're still getting a new set of downs and you're in the red zone. But this was a great game. I think it was about as expected. I gave slight lean toward the Houston Texans. We saw the line move in their direction as the week went along, just because of the quarterback. I thought, like, in a game that I feel like is a total toss-up, it's a second meeting between division opponents, win and get in, you're on the road. I trust CJ Stroud more than I do Gardner Minshew. And, Minshew didn't play poorly. He didn't have like the crushing viral interception or anything like that. But this was a game that Indy played very, very conservatively. And I mean, 30 carries for Jonathan Taylor for 188 yards and a touchdown. He ended up leaving the game late. Kit did come back. But I think we saw some of the effects of that heavy workload. I mean, you don't really see 30 carry games in the NFL anymore.
No, you don't. At one point, Taylor was doubtful to come back, and then, he's back. Okay. Zach Moss went 6 for 30. Could have used him a little bit more, but Taylor was awesome. He had the long 49-yard touchdown run. They only let Minshew throw it 24 times, 1 sack in there also. Mm-hmm. But that's maybe why he didn't have the soul-crushing pick. I think they were maybe a little too conservative. I mean, you got Michael Pittman out there. You got Josh Downs against the Texans defense that got absolutely torched by Joe Flacco just a couple weeks ago. I don't know. I think I would have opened it up just a little bit more.
I agree. I think in retrospect, the Colts would probably say the same thing. I think that conservativeness led to a really inefficient day on third down. I mean, they didn't convert their first third down of the day until late in the fourth quarter. They were 1 of 11 on third downs, 0 of 1 on fourth downs. Of course, that one being the drop screen pass. They attempted a long field goal as well and missed. So yeah, I think the Colts probably thought they could win this game, with their defense, which has been very up and down. It's been super hit or miss. It's either played really well or really poorly. And I thought they did a good job for the most part on Devin Singletary. I mean, Houston did its best to pound the run as well. I mean, 24 carries for Singletary. We saw like almost no Dameon Pierce whatsoever. And holding Singletary to 63 yards with a long of 7, considering how he's played over the second half of the season, I think you'll take that if you're Indy. The problem is you can't be giving up 9 for 195 and a score to Nico Collins, and even the touchdown to Andrew Beck. I mean, it was like a 8 yard or something like that. But a really great play design, and he's wide open in the back of the end zone. Yep,
Stroud zipped it in there. It was well designed, indeed. Houston, they host the Cleveland Browns in a rematch of a couple of weeks ago. This is in the traditional Houston playoff spot. Whenever they have a home playoff game, they are the Saturday afternoon game. Sure enough, here they are hosting the Browns in this one here. Let's talk Cleveland-Cincy real quick, and then we can talk about this matchup. Yeah. I don't really have a whole lot to say about Cleveland-Cincy because honestly, this was a nothing game. Jamar Chase got his 4 catches. Tyler Boyd got 1 catch in what was probably his last game. Joe Mixon got his production. But honestly, Cleveland didn't care. They didn't play anybody. There's not much to say except more about a postmortem on the Bengals season.
Well, I think the other way to spin this is, man, do we have to worry about the Browns? They were down 30-0 to the Cincinnati Bengals in week 18. They've lost all the momentum going into the playoffs. Yeah. No, this was more of a lay down than we expected. I think there was some momentum. The more I listened to podcasts and read gambling minds throughout the week, there's a lot of like, well, this number's up to like 7. I think the Browns can hang around. This will be maybe low scoring. No, it was clear like 5 minutes into the game that Cincinnati was going to roll. Big day for Joe Mixon. Chase Brown got in the mix in the second half as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're just going to see a lot of names on both sides. So you're like, oh, okay, Charlie Jones, Andrea Iasovis, Tanner Hudson in the mix. This was a kind of complete laydown, really by both sides in the second half. And I mean, Cleveland didn't even get on the board until 7 or 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Was not a banner day necessarily for Jeff Driscoll, who's always held this intrigue around the league. I was talking to John about him last week on the pod. He's like, I don't know, man. He's super athletic. You never really think a guy like him is that athletic. He tested off the charts. I think this is why, what we saw yesterday, why he's kind of been stuck in this third, fourth quarterback role since leaving college football.
Former Bengals legend Jeff Driscoll,
right.
Former Lions legend Jeff Driscoll, and among other places there. Charlie Jones had a big punt return touchdown earlier in the season. He was supposed to he got drafted ahead of Iasovic, but both of them might be competing for that Tyler Boyd role next year. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So I've made my opinions, my emotionally held opinion note about T. Higgins. I think they should try to find a way to keep him, even if it's the 1-year franchise tag, and then they have to deal with this next year. Keep the band together. I got in a debate on Twitter a little bit with Tom Kasnick about this, and he is thinking the Bengals should shake it up, but I disagree. I think this is a giant write-off season, and I think they should find a way to keep Higgins involved next year. I know it's cap constraints are there. It's real and powerful, but I think it's such a better team when they have both Chase and Higgins.
I respectfully disagree because I think he should go sign with the Jaguars as a free agent. And there we go. Maybe we'll send you Calvin Ridley. You can sign him maybe for less this summer. Reunite Lawrence, Etienne, Higgins. That's the dream scenario, man. And it's realistic if Cincinnati opts to not pursue T. Higgins. But I think you're right. I think the franchise tag to me makes the most sense. I think if you're T. Higgins, you're not thrilled about that. But I also think as far as these type of negotiations go. And we'll find out, that sometimes guys can kind of change on a dime or get some outside influence, when push really comes to shove. But I think T. Higgins has been pretty amicable about this whole thing, right? I mean, there's not a lot of receivers, right? Yeah. There's not a lot of receivers that would just say like, we didn't get it done. I'll just play out the season, no big deal. I mean, if anything, it feels like it goes the complete opposite way more often than not. So I do think they're dealing with what seems to be a very reasonable person and somebody who maybe more open to something like the franchise tag or kind of pushing off these negotiations than your average receiver. But nonetheless, I am rooting hard for T. Higgins to hit the open market.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially because there's not going to be a whole lot out on that open market otherwise. Yeah. There.
Ironically, by the way, Jeff, I forgot to mention this when we talked Jags Titans. I hate to say this because I've rooted against this man for so long, but I feel like Derrick Henry signing a 1-year deal with the Jags would actually make a ton of sense. Like that is exactly the type of back they need.
Yeah, that would be a bitter pill for Titans fans to swallow for sure.
Yeah, well, he's from the area, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. Be good for you guys. All right, let's talk Cleveland Houston here. Let's do a quick look ahead to the first playoff game. What do you think is going to happen on this one here?
I think as far as the obvious early Saturday afternoon slot goes, and like you said, I mean, if you're the NFL schedule makers, this is like the lock of all locks. This is like your dream Saturday afternoon matchup. Browns Texans. We're hearkening back to the days of Matt Schaub. We're seeing the Browns as 2.5-point road favorites.
Wow,
which is interesting to me. Not necessarily surprising. Maybe you're baking in the extended rest. Cleveland's had so many guys, especially on defense, who've kind of been banged up week to week. You think of someone like Myles Garrett now getting a chance to be probably as close to full health as he's been since midseason. But that's still a lot of faith in ultimately your fourth quarterback in Joe Flacco. And I think there's still going to be questions about Elijah Moore, who suffered what seemed to be a fairly serious concussion. Obviously, Amari Cooper was banged up as well. I do think if Cleveland could come into this game at full strength, I like the Browns to win and cover. I think they could win this game by a field goal. Houston, credit to them certainly for rallying over these last 2 weeks, winning a really tough game on the road last week. But I still feel like this offense is not quite at the level that it was when Tank Dell was healthy. It kind of feels like right now it's Nico Collins and then a huge drop off to any other playmaker. And I think against a defense like Cleveland, that's where you're really going to feel the Tank Dell absence.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're going to get Noah Brown back. I mean, it was a must-win game for Houston, and he couldn't go. Robert Woods was barely there. He's hurt himself. So, yeah, I mean, it's basically Collins and Schultz and maybe a dump off to Singletary. I think it's easy to say, well, look at what happened a couple of weeks ago, but, Stroud didn't play in that game. And that makes a huge difference. But still, yeah, I'm leaning on taking Houston with the points right now, but I'll reserve the right to change that in the next couple of days. See what happens with that. We are on the Blue Wire Network. Here are a couple of their ads. Welcome back. Thanks for your indulgence with that. Thanks to Blue Wire. Let's keep on breaking down some of the other playoff relevant slates. Let's talk. Let's hit up this. We did the AFC South. Let's hit the NFC South. Let's get all the popular teams going all at once here. Let's talk a little bit about Touchdown Gate and New Orleans, Atlanta, real quick.
I mean, what a fitting end to this division, to this game specifically, to this season for both of these teams.
Yep.
That was just an unbelievable moment. That was one of my favorite moments of the entire season. And then of course we get the quintessential Jameis Winston interview explaining
the best part
what happened.
Yeah,
dude, Jameis it's just unbelievable how like authentic this guy is. Like he is truly like a movie character come to life. Like there's never been a guy like this. Like you usually there's like been funny players who we made fun of over the years, and then usually you kind of realize like, oh, it's kind of an act. He's playing into it. Like this is just like totally who Jameis is. Like he gave a legit like 3.5 minute interview explaining / defending why he decided to audible out of a kneel down to run in a touchdown to make it 48-17 with under a minute left. I mean, if you're Arthur Smith, I think you're actually right to be upset about this. Normally, I actually am kind of against coaches barking at each other in these situations, but you know, the game was well in hand. It's one thing if you just line up in a normal formation and you score, but I think specifically it's the fake kneel down that makes it feel like you're rubbing it in. And then of course on top of this, Arthur Smith finds out, a few hours later that he's canned.
Yeah. Well, and maybe, I don't know. The fake kneel down sucks, but just line up in a normal formation. I mean, it was funny. I heard reports like the Falcons defenders were asking the offensive linemen, are you guys just going to kneel it down? I mean, they were hoping for that and all that, but you know what? Jameis is kind of right though. Funny. I mean, hell, they're at the 1. Jamal Williams hadn't scored all year.
Yep.
These guys are professionals too. I don't know if there's any contract clauses that were triggered with that, but probably not, because you probably had to get like 10 touchdowns for it to matter. But he got hurt in the first game of the year.
Right.
I don't know. It's Arthur Smith too, and it just couldn't happen to a nice.
Yeah, right. There's not a lot of people out there that are like, oh, poor Arthur Smith. I don't think he's really, getting a bunch of sympathy here. But no, the Jameis explanation was great. If you haven't watched it, just search Jameis Winston on Twitter, and it'll be 100 videos that pop up. I mean, part of his defense was, well, we almost had a pick 6, and would it have been rubbing it in if we had ran it all the way back? So he's like, well, what's the difference if we just run it in from the 1 as opposed to having run it in on an interception return? And I'm like, for me, that was kind of like the Alonzo Mourning gif. I was like, well, yeah, it's actually not that bad of a point, I suppose.
Right.
But yeah,
and the only reason it wasn't a pick 6 is because Honey Bear was like showboating down on the return. If he goes hard the whole way, he scores. But
that was a Logan Woodside interception, by the way. If you're wondering how this game went for Atlanta, we got a Logan Woodside appearance at the end. Nonetheless, 48-17 Saints. Falcons, their season's over. They're 7-10. Obviously, they fired Arthur Smith. There was a report that the Falcons may be very interested in Bill Belichick. Should he become available, I would imagine he would have other suitors as well, but that would be an interesting landing spot, to say the least.
Yeah.
I think to me, like, if you could, let's say you have your choice of the Falcons, Chargers, Commanders, Raiders, all these open jobs right now. Is there one that you would say, man, this is the job I want?
Chargers, Justin Herbert.
Yes, I think that's the answer solely because of Herbert. Yeah. Falcons is appealing for other reasons. Obviously, you don't have the quarterback, but you have pretty much everything else that you need in place. A team like Washington is appealing, or even New England, because obviously you have the chance to draft that quarterback. But no, I think you're right. I think Chargers has to be the answer just because of Herbert and having Herbert locked up.
Yeah, and I don't trust Belichick to draft that quarterback either. To be honest, I'm not going to lie. I think Coach Bill Belichick's a hell of a lot better than GM Bill Belichick, but then again, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to see.
Do you think if he lands elsewhere, because he also had a quote yesterday where he was like sounded open to relinquishing GM duties, which is interesting.
I saw that.
And so that to me is an indication that, one, maybe he's a little more interested in sticking around New England than we think, and two, if he goes somewhere else, I don't see this being like a John Gruden situation where he's like, if you hire me, I get full control. He seems like he's willing to at least relinquish part of that.
Yeah. But the damage is done in New England. I mean,
if I were him, I wouldn't want to coach there. Like that's the worst of all these situations.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, but for the fact that he's won what he's done what he's done there, and that all the roots that are there and all that. But who even knows what the working relationships are there? It may be time for, parting, but he did sign an extension too, so he's under contract. So they'll have to figure that part out. Saints side, I mean, I don't think Dennis Allen is that good of a coach either.
No.
I saw Fire Dennis Allen was trending on Twitter last night because Saints fans were ticked off that he's defending Arthur Smith more than his own players. So I don't know. I mean, and plus it's just been kind of one of those seasons for the Saints. I mean, yes, they got the win in week 18, but the damage was done previously, so they lost all the tiebreakers.
Yeah, I mean, this is not necessarily what you want. I think if you're the Saints, I think Dennis Allen is like the most average coach in the NFL, maybe below average at times. Like he's just not really somebody who moves the needle whatsoever. And you win this game in dominant fashion, doesn't end up mattering whatsoever because Tampa Bay had already beaten Carolina, and that was a game that went really quickly, just based on game flow. So like by the time the New Orleans game had wrapped up, they already knew. It's not like they were going to the locker room to watch the end of the Tampa Bay game.
Right.
So just a very weird season from New Orleans. Never we kind of talked about them early in the season as like, all right, maybe this could be a 10-11 win team. They're in a bad division, and just never really felt like they got off the ground. Never really broke into that true contender status. And I don't really know what changes this offseason to push them a higher level up. I mean, if you're running it back with Derek Carr, I think we know you're probably stuck in that middle zone no matter what.
And you are running it back with Derek Carr. There's no way you can get around that with that contract. Yeah. I mean, this is their lot in life. Now, Derek Carr played great yesterday, by the way.
He did.
9.4 yards per attempt. He was not captain check down. Shaheed got a long one. Olave had a touchdown. A.T. Perry was a machine. Despite coming into the game questionable with an illness, it was. I mean, it was beautiful. I mean, this is the way this offense should run.
I think you feel good about your weapons right now. That's kind of something you could say positively for New Orleans. And obviously Olave is going to continue to get better. I think Rashid Shaheed has clearly proven that even if he is just a deep ball guy, like he's a lot more reliable than some of the other players who've been in that category. You compare him to like MVS. I think he kind of reminds me of like peak Robbie Anderson, who kind of went off the deep end and is the end of his career has not been great, but for a while there he was a really dangerous weapon, and that's exactly what Shaheed brings to this offense. And I really like A.T. Perry, man. I think he's kind of the succession plan for Michael Thomas, because we're going down that road yet again, right? Michael Thomas looked okay early in the season, got hurt, never came back, and I don't really see him magically getting healthy as he gets older and moves further into his career. So I think you kind of go forward with that. Olave, Perry, Shaheed, Juwan Johnson has played well. We'll see what they do long term with Alvin Kamara. Obviously, you just drafted Kendre Miller to potentially be a longer term replacement. So it's not all doom and gloom for the Saints. It's hard to see how you really break through to that next level in the NFC.
Yeah, I think it's the end of the Kamara and Thomas era. I wouldn't be surprised. We saw a lot of Kendre Miller yesterday. May not be him, but I think it might be time. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Let's talk a little Bucks and Panthers. But first, quick note, get ready for the ultimate big game parties at Circa Resort and Casino. Super Sunday is in Las Vegas this year. Watch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim's big game viewing party. Massive screen, booming game sound, and a view of the pyrotechnic and visual effects throughout the game. Snag the best seat in the sun with day beds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Or touchdown at the world's largest sportsbook, Circa Sports, for the big game bash. 3 stories of football glory featuring a 78 million pixel screen. Book your seat with a variety of reservation options, including bottle service, open bar, stadium-style food, and more. Don't miss these legendary viewing experiences on February 11th. The big game parties, only at Circa Resort and Casino. Reserve today at circalasvegas.com. The Bucks are going to be hosting the Eagles after they clinched the NFC South with a boring win over the Carolina Panthers. I don't think there's this was not an offensive showcase here. Baker Mayfield got hurt early in this game. It looked like for a second there that, and he was already dealing with sore ribs going into this game. Looked like it might have been a case there where, they might have found a way to fall out of it. They're only putting up 9 points against the Panthers.
This was so ugly. So ugly. We had punts on 10 of our first 12 drives. The other 2 drives were a fumble by Carolina and a field goal by Tampa Bay. Obviously, they finished with 3 field goals on the day. I guess credit to the Carolina defense for showing up. That's kind of the one positive you could pull out of here. I mean, Chuba Hubbard had an okay day. But other than that, man, I mean, this was kind of the same old story for Carolina, which was coming off of its worst offensive performance of the season. I mean, just 124 total yards last week against Jacksonville, which is an insanely low number. I mean, they rushed for more than that today. Like, the running game was somewhat there. The per carry average wasn't fantastic, but 131 rushing yards as a team. Bryce Young, 11 for 18 for 94 yards. Took 3 sacks. Just, man, this Carolina team has become really tough to watch. I mean, Tampa Bay did not play well at all. I think you could argue, like, if you just kind of blindly look at the numbers without looking at the final score, you probably think Tampa Bay lost this game, but they did not. Carolina somehow found a way to play worse. I mean, this was a 4.0 yards per play day for Carolina, 3.6 for Tampa Bay, 228 yards on 64 plays.
I feel bad for the people like who are stuck with that game as their local option and not being a fan of one of these two teams instead of watching other playoff relevant games or any other game that might have been relevant to any sort of interest at all, because this was a boring game. Rachaad White did well. I thought he was about the one Tampa Bay option that had a decent game. I mean, Godwin was 6 for 51, but Mike Evans was totally shut down in this one. Baker Mayfield, 4.3 yards per passing attempt there. Got sacked 3 times. I don't know. I mean, the good news for them is they still get a home playoff game, and they get it against an Eagles team that has lost now 5 out of their last 6. Let's just move on to the Eagles in this horrific game that they had, where they benched their starters not because of Dallas, but because of their own struggles.
Yeah, this is something that we hit on the XM show last week, and I said it somewhat in jest, but I was like, look, if you're the Eagles and you could kind of go either way in this game, right? You could rest starters and just say, all right, we're going to kind of, we're not feeling great about ourselves, but we'll get healthy and we'll try to figure this thing out with an extra week for the playoffs. Or you play your starters in an effort to generate momentum, and if you play badly, then you feel even worse about yourself. Yep. And I think that's exactly what happened to the Eagles. I mean, if you're an Eagles fan right now, like if you're on Twitter yesterday, it feels like this team is just like, or this fan base is just giving up. Like, they're fully expecting the Eagles to lose this game straight up to Tampa Bay in round 1. And you kind of see why, man. I mean, Philly was certainly trying early on. They ended up pulling Jalen Hurts and some of the starters late in the second quarter, but that was after an interception by Hurts. That was after, going out on downs. I think they punted 3 or 4 times. They had an A.J. Brown fumble where he banged up his knee as well. Thankfully, that does not look nearly as serious as it did at the time. I think that would have been the cherry on top of all this is, losing A.J. Brown to a serious knee injury. But I think the point of this entire week for Philly was, one, hopefully you play well enough and maybe Dallas trips up, which obviously they didn't. But if you're going to play your starters, you want to look good. You want to generate some positive momentum going into the playoffs. And I think for a team that was already kind of in panic mode and worried going into the postseason, you've now made it worse. And yeah. I think that Philly-Tampa Bay game is going to be really interesting because it's not like Tampa Bay is plowing into the playoffs with all this momentum. But I think the Eagles are very beatable right now. I mean, I think there's really only a handful of teams that you could say, yeah, Philly for sure beats them 10 out of 10 times straight up. That's a pretty small group of teams right now.
Yeah, I mean, I could say, of all the matchups Tampa Bay could get, this is one of the better ones they could have asked for there.
Absolutely. And it's crazy to say that because, 8 weeks ago, you would not have said that at all, right? I think you'd be terrified of Philly or Dallas, coming to your place. But I think this is a great matchup. I would rather play the Eagles right now than the Rams.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that. I think injuries have really wrecked this team. I'm seeing a lot of anti-Sirianni buzz on Twitter. A lot of people are starting to turn on him, thinking that this might be a must-win game, which is just crazy and preposterous if you think about it. But I mean, I see how they've looked. I've seen some of the decisions they make. I will say one thing. I was thinking about this with Buffalo last night too, but Philly is the one that brought this about. I know mathematically it's the right. It's like it's effective, but this whole tush push obsession it's not compelling football. It's not fun to see 17 quarterback sneaks a game. And I also know that I think it does take its toll on the quarterback a little bit there. Mm-hmm. They're taking a lot of extra hits on this. I don't know. There's maybe it's just a visceral reaction. It's an emotional reaction, but I think they get too dialed in on this. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, yes, you should have this in your arsenal, but every single 3rd and 1, every single 4th and 1, it's the same thing. And I guess, I mean, when it works 85% of the time, I guess you do it, but I think there's like ancillary costs to it.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I would have to, kind of hear from Jalen Hurts and the offense on that. Obviously, it kind of results in a pile up more than anything, where, Hurts is just kind of being thrust in, and, you almost worry more about, like, the legs and the knees of offensive linemen when you just have a big pile of bodies. But I mean, it's been so effective that it's hard to knock it. The Eagles seem to be embracing it. It doesn't seem like it's something that they're like reluctant to run.
Right.
The problem is they just weren't in that situation very often yesterday. They were facing a lot of 3rd and longs. They didn't have a whole lot of 3rd and 1s. I think they did one tush push on like their first or second drive of the game, and that was it.
Yep, that's right. That's right. So, I think it's I think it's one of those things though. But AJ Brown got hurt in this game. Devonta Smith missed the game, and we'll see what he's like. He's going to be going into next year. But I don't know. I think it's I don't know. I think there's some legit concerns here. And we'll see what happens with going forward. But I don't know. I'd be very concerned about their status. DeAndre Swift missed with an illness. I think they need to get him going. The Bucs are a tough team to get to do that against, but I think they need that balance.
Yeah, and we mentioned the AJ Brown injury. At the time looked disastrous, and especially at the time it happened. Like, the Eagles were not playing well. AJ Brown had just fumbled. That's the play he got hurt on, and you're like, oh my god, like, things are completely crumbling. And now AJ Brown looks like he seriously injured his knee. It does look like this is a non-serious injury. That's what Mike Garafolo reported yesterday. Still something that could bother him, though. I mean, it's not like you have 2 weeks off here. It's like you still got to go play now on the road at Tampa. So I think it's fair to assume that AJ Brown, could be limited throughout the week. We'll see if he's 100%. You mentioned Swift, Devontae Smith. Those guys did not play this past week. I don't really worry too much about getting those guys back, but if AJ Brown is at all compromised, I think that is just kind of another hit to a team that can't really afford to be without any of its key pieces. I mean, I kind of feel about like the Eagles the way I would the Jags if they had made it in, where you're just like, all right, great, but like there's no expectations. Like I haven't seen a single Eagles fan who's like, all right, just had to get in, now we'll make our run. I mean, it just feels like everybody's expecting them to either be tripped up by Tampa Bay or get blown out in the divisional round.
Yeah. So I haven't looked at the lines yet on this one. I'm going to guess Philly's like a 5-point favorite on the road with a total in the, I'll say mid 40s, 44. What are the actual lines here?
Total's 44.5. Philly 2.5-point favorites on the road.
Okay. I mean, I think that's proper. I was just trying to guess what I thought it was going to be instead of what I think it should be. So I'm going to have a tough call on that one there. I'll probably take Philly anyhow, because I keep taking Philly and then wondering why I keep falling farther behind in staff picks, but I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I mean, we'll see I think a lot of it has to do with Brown and Smith status. If they're out, I mean, they're screwed.
Yeah. I mean, Philly won this game in week 3. Tampa had 174 total yards in that game. Philly had 472. So that was a long time ago. Feels like a completely different version of this team, maybe a slightly different version of Tampa as well. But I still like Philly here. If AJ Brown's good to go, I'm not taking the Eagles to lose this game. I don't think I'd pick them to win the next round, but I think they could find a way to get by a Buccaneers team that just put up 3 field goals in a must-win game on the Panthers.
That could be plausibly a Philly San Francisco second round game. Or we could, I mean, the Rams could beat Detroit. We could talk, and let's talk about those two teams next, their respective games. We won't have to talk too much about the Rams San Francisco game because it was all subs, but Detroit, Minnesota, there's a lot happening in this game here. Detroit played their starters the whole damn game. Like, even after they had an injury to Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown's there in the fourth quarter. He gets banged up a little bit. They finally take him out in the fourth quarter a little bit. They had another receiver get hurt. They had Goff in with 2 minutes left in the game. I'm like, have we learned nothing here?
The whole dang game. I guess if you're going to commit to it, you fully commit to it. And the Laporta injury is, number one reason that, teams would prioritize the rest on the rust versus rest side of that argument. And, it's not looking good for Laporta. Hyperextension, bone bruise in that knee. Not quite as serious as it initially looked, but also something that you would imagine keeps him out at least 1 week, right? I mean, we haven't really been given a timeline. I would be shocked if he's out there in any capacity for the wild card round. But this was a pretty classic Minnesota-Detroit game, I think, about what you'd expect. Nick Mullins almost threw for 400 yards again. He also threw 2 more picks. Jared Goff had his ups and downs, mostly ups. Pretty good game for him. I think the most emblematic part of this game was to begin the fourth quarter, 42-yard touchdown, or excuse me, this was the end of the third quarter. 38-yard touchdown to Justin Jefferson, 70-yard touchdown to Amon-Ra St. Brown, 42-yard touchdown to Jordan Addison. Those all played out over the course of like 6 total plays.
Yeah. And the defense was horrific on all 3 of those plays. The Addison one especially. The Addison one, I'm like, where is there a safety anywhere out there? I mean, it was wild.
Detroit looked like they were going to put this game away so many times, and then a play like that would happen.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. Nick Mullins threw for like a combined 800 yards in the 2 games against him in the last 3 weeks, and he's Nick Mullins. Now of course, he threw 6 interceptions in those 2 games also, because that's what Nick Mullins does. But I don't know, and I'll tell you what, I don't want to face. I mean, the Rams are the wrong team to face right now if you're Detroit, especially Stafford revenge game in a playoff game. I mean, the storyline here is just ridiculous. I mean, Detroit's such a feel-good story to end on this kind of note. It's kind of scary. I mean, we'll see.
I like the Rams in that game. I'll tell you, I think it's going to be close. I was a little surprised where the line came in. If you want to hazard a guess on that.
All right, I do want to hazard a guess because I like that phraseology. I'm going to guess it's Rams plus 4.5 with a total of 47.
Okay, total's up at 51.5. I'm seeing Rams plus 3.5, which to me, especially after the Laporta injury, I thought this could have been 2.5, 3. 3.5 seemed a little much to me. I think with as leaky, like Detroit's defense didn't really shut anybody up this week, right? I mean, I think that's the big concern. Like the Lions could score on the Rams, no question. The Rams are going to be able to score in Detroit, right? I mean, this is a game that I think could be 33-30, last possession type of game. And obviously the Lions getting this at home, I mean, that's going to be one of the better crowds I think that we're going to see in a long time, just because Detroit's been waiting for this. It's not going to be an easy environment for the Rams, but I think both defenses are really going to struggle. And I just 3.5 is a little much to me. Like I'll happily take the Rams with 3.5 points.
But to be fair, I agree with you. I do think that I think your read on what the line should be is proper. I'm just guessing where I thought it was going to end up. So I probably will take the Rams. That's my initial lead as far as that goes. I'm trying to find the latest on Laporta to see if last I saw was like a hyperextension. And of course, Campbell after the game was I feel like he was doing a little CYA saying it's not as bad as it initially looked or something like that. But hyperextension and bone bruise in his left knee is the latest there. We'll find out more today. But I think he's going to miss time. We'll see. I hope I'm wrong. I'm playing internet doctor from my chair here from 3,000 miles away. So, we'll dial that down just a little bit, but man, what a tough injury there.
Really tough. I mean, again, this is a 50-50 game to me with Laporta. And, if he's not able to go, that's a major, major hit for the Lions, who obviously have Amon-Ra St. Brown, but it's, not a team that has a ton of depth. They have a bunch of guys who kind of profile as like number 2, number 3s who've been fine for them as depth pieces, but you take Laporta out of the mix and that certainly changes things.
Yeah, and Cleve Raymond left with a knee injury as well in this one here. Jamison Williams missed the game with his ankle injury that was deemed not serious a week ago by Campbell. I think he's wish casting sometimes with these injury forecasts. Maybe that's why I am so skeptical about his latest statements. Maybe I should, again, I'm not a doctor. I shouldn't be that. Shouldn't try to play one, but it's easy to want to do one. That's kind of the knee-jerk reaction by me. So anyhow, Rams Niners. I don't even think we need to talk about this game because none of the critical players played. All Debo and Ayuk played for some reason. I don't understand that. Why they were in there at all for that game is beyond me. They did leave ultimately, and the backup receivers were found wanting. Yep. All the drops were happening in that game, but let's move on from that. I don't think there's really anything else to say about that particular game. Let's talk instead. We'll hit up. Let's go. Where do we want to turn this one here? Let's talk a little bit about Green Bay and Chicago. I mean, the last NFC playoff spot. Tip of the hat to the Packers. they played their asses off. Jordan Love was awesome. Their defense, much to the chagrin of the Joe Barry hater nation, was really pretty darn awesome too, especially in the red zone, shutting down Fields.
The defense played a best case scenario game, I thought. And, I wouldn't say it was a best case scenario game for the offense, but given the circumstances, it was pretty close. Jordan Love, 27 of 32 for 316 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think I said to you on Thursday, if Green Bay wins this game, it's going to be because it's a Herculean effort from Jordan Love. And I wouldn't say it, it felt like he was carrying this team necessarily, but didn't really make a bad throw all day and made some really good throws. You had a touchdown taken off the board that I thought probably could have stood. Bo Melton, one of those plays where he's kind of pinning the ball to his leg. Like, I understand 50-50, kind of a bang-bang call, but an insane throw by Jordan Love in the back of the end zone with 2 defenders draped all over him. I mean, this was a kind of reminder, like, I'm the guy type of game from Jordan Love. If there was anybody out there who was questioning whether or not that was the case, I mean, my goodness, like, he played better in this game than Aaron Rodgers had in like his last 3 or 4 win or go home type of scenarios. Aaron Jones, got him going as well. I mean, there were a few plays in the second half where it looked like Aaron Jones was hit at the line of scrimmage. If that's A.J. Dillon, if that's Patrick Taylor, they're down for a 2-yard loss. And there's Aaron Jones, spinning his way out and picking up 3 or 4 yards. He did not become the first Packer ever with 3 straight 120-yard games, but he got close, 22 for 111. Another big day for Jaden Reed, multiple big plays, had a 59-yarder where he got caught from behind. Said he had to do 10 push-ups on the sideline because he got caught. I guess that's their team policy. But he finished 4 for 112. I mean, pretty easily the best rookie wide receiver season that the Packers have had in a very, very long time. And this Bo Melton character just continues to emerge. I mean, 2 straight weeks where he has been heavily involved, and it doesn't really feel fluky.
And he's kind of getting some of the Jaden Reed plays, 2 rushing attempts in this one here as well. They're trying to find ways to get the ball in his hands. Jordan Love threw for 316 while getting with Christian Watson not playing and Romeo Doubs dropping the 1 pass attempt he had before leaving with an injury.
Another great throw.
Yeah. This game should have been a bigger number, for the Packers. If you look at the yards they put up in this game, Love did lose a fumble. That was
Trevor Lawrence fumble.
Yeah. But I mean, he's doing this with Jaden Reed and Bo Melton and Dontavian Wicks, who got the 2 touchdowns. Tucker Kraft is contributing. Musgrave's finally back, so there's that. But they're going to be live against the Cowboys. I don't think this is going to be a squash. I think this is going to be a game. I think this is another setup here where I think Dallas would have rather faced. Well, I don't think they'd rather face the Rams, even though they did crush the Rams earlier. But I mean, I of the 3 wildcard teams, the Eagles are easily playing the worst of the 3.
Yeah, no question. I think if you're Dallas, you're okay with this matchup. I still think the Cowboys at home are the vastly better team, but they're vulnerable. They've been vulnerable in this very spot. Many times over the years, Packers tend to play the Cowboys well, even when the Cowboys may have the talent advantage. So yeah, I think if you're Dallas, you feel good about it, but you don't feel great. Especially if the Green Bay defense can continue to kind of prop itself up like it has over these last 2 weeks. You mentioned the red zone defense. That was fantastic. Some timely sacks too by Green Bay. Yep. I mean, Fields was sacked 5 times on the day, and at least 3 of those came on 3rd downs, to either, stymie an attempt at what would have been, a first down to potentially score or to push the Bears out of field goal range. I mean, those were huge plays by guys like Kenny Clark, and Quay Walker got in on the action. Lucas Van Ness, their first round pick, had a big sack as well. I did not see this performance coming by the Packers defense. I'm not shocked that Jordan Love has played well of late. You can't say you're surprised by that. I did not see the defense showing up the way that they did. I mean, the yardage discrepancy alone, Green Bay put up 432 yards of total offense, 192 for Chicago, 3 of 11 on 3rd down, 4.2 yards per play. And the other thing, Jeff, I mean, you notice if you're watching red zone or just watching games in the late window, this game ended like 20 minutes before any other game. Like there were games that were still like early in the 4th quarter when this game ended because there were long drives. It was a very short game. And I think this is what you want if you're Green Bay. Like Chicago only possessed the ball 6 times in the whole game.
That's amazing. That's a tribute to the offense. That's just grinding out long drives, even though they only got 17 points to show for it there. We are robbed of some dramatic finishes. Tampa Bay clinched early. First game done in the early window. This was like the first game done in the late window of the ones that mattered too. So that kind of it rendered Seattle, Arizona irrelevant. It put Saints were put out of their divisional misery there. So I can't get over the defensive performance the last 2 weeks by the Packers. They got torn up by Bryce Young, by Baker Mayfield, and Tommy DeVito in 3 consecutive weeks, only to turn around and shut down the Vikings and shut down the Bears. Kudos to them. I mean, they got it done. I think this is probably still a pretty good setup for the Cowboys. Let's hazard a guess on that one too while we're at it there. I'm going to say the Cowboys are a 7-point favorite with a total of 50.
I think you'll see some 7s out there. I'm seeing 7.5 at ESPN bet, total 49.5. So you're basically right on it.
Yeah. Got lucky there. But yeah, it's just seems like a number, a good, that hook is going to be critical. It's going to try to sucker people into taking the Packers. I feel like they want to do that. I don't know. We'll see. I might be that sucker and walk right through it. We'll see. But okay. We'll have all off season to speculate on what the Bears do with Fields, and they're going to tell us anyhow. So we spend enough bandwidth on SiriusXM on that. So we'll move on. Let's talk Cowboys real quick and Cowboys Commanders. They took care of business after a little early hiccup in this game. They kind of just drove it forward there. I mean, Sam Howell did Sam Howell things, which helps. And now Rivera's fired for the Commanders. So we can talk about them in a second too, but Dallas did what they had to do here in this game.
They did. Other than, Brandon Aubrey getting a field goal blocked and then missing another in the second half, which is just, unheard of for how he's been this season. Yeah. Dallas came out, touchdown on their first drive, then had the field goal block, then Dak threw a pick. And you start wondering, all right, well, maybe this could be one of those weird, just disaster games. You're not taking it all that seriously. You're on the road in kind of dreary conditions. No, once it was 10-7 Washington, Dallas, came down midway through the second, scored to make it 14-10, tacked another one on before halftime, scored on its first 2 drives coming out of the half. And it very quickly went from a kind of worrisome, you're down 10-7 to you're up 35-10 and the game feels completely over.
Yep. So, they got out of there with too many major injuries, unlike the Eagles, unlike some other teams out there. So they accomplished that. The Commanders, they were said, the report was out before the game that they were going to fire Rivera. So no surprise that he's gone. GM is gone as well. I mean, it's a full, hey, new ownership. It's their, the ownership transfer happened too late last year for them to do anything, but they want to get their people in. Totally understandable. And then, the Commanders' performance this year just sealed that off. They get the number 2 overall pick. They're going to get a quarterback. It's just a question of which one they get. They're sitting in a pretty good position there as far as teardowns go. This is about what you want, I think.
Well, they just feel like they're no longer a cursed franchise, right? Like Washington's been in this situation in the past, and you see it, and you're like, well, they'll find a way to mess this up. And I think there's this new ownership group and new regime still has to prove that it won't do that. But I think we're willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in a way that we obviously never were for good reason with Dan Snyder and the decisions that he would make. So, yeah, I mean, I think Washington has a chance if they hit this number 2 pick to do a complete facelift to kind of change the way that we've thought about them for what's basically been my entire life. I mean, I don't remember the heyday of, the then Redskins when they were one of the premier franchises in the NFL. Like, as long as I've followed the NFL, Washington has been an average team at best, if not a doormat and a laughingstock. So I think this is their big opportunity to change that. I'm sure you saw this morning they're bringing in Bob Myers of all people, widely known as kind of the key architect of the Golden State Warriors dynasty. I don't know exactly what his role is going to be. He's not the GM or anything like that, but it sounds like it's more of an kind of prominent front office advisory position.
I hadn't seen that actually. That's interesting. I wonder if he keeps his ESPN gig because it's been weird hearing him do games and doing studio stuff too, but I think pretty good actually. I've enjoyed him, but that's a pretty big turnover there. So so we'll see what happens with that. But I mean, they got that. They also get the Bears 2nd round pick as part of the Montez Sweat deal. So they got a lot of draft capital coming in this offseason. I think a lot of cap room too. So this should be a team that is pretty active this offseason. So we'll see what they do with all that.
Yeah, I mean, we should mention we have our, the top of the draft obviously locked in now. Chicago, Washington, New England, Arizona, and the Chargers hold the top 5 picks. So New England, able to avoid the complete disaster. I don't know if we even want to talk about that game. That was as ugly as it gets.
No need.
I saw a no touchdown, by the way, paid out like 18-1. Kind of wish I would have thrown down on that.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
we knew it was going to be ugly. We knew there was some snow in the forecast, but that was one that just got progressively worse and worse and worse as the game went along. Like just a perfect end of the season for both teams.
Well, Breece Hall got the touchdown, so you're glad you didn't. So you're good there. But Breece Hall, by the way, 500 yards in the last 3 games, over 500 yards the last 3 games. Getting more excited about him. That's for sure. In the keeper dynasty context, would be pretty big on that one there. But yeah, the Pats side of things. I mean, yeah, just a perfect way to end there. We don't even need to talk about them a whole lot more. We got all off season on that. We did talk Belichick earlier. Let's just get to the marquee game, the Sunday night game, Miami Buffalo, because that was the one that was the last thing that kind of changed everything there, or like not changed. Well, yeah, changed and set the playoff schedule for us here. What a comeback for the Bills. You know, it looked like they were kind of like the turnover is going to finally come back to haunt them, and they're going to really get stuck playing the same game next week. And instead, they're the 2 seed. They host the Steelers, and everybody thinks they're live and dangerous now.
I'm not even going to have you guess this one, Jeff. The Bills are 10-point favorites over the Pittsburgh Steelers this weekend. And I get it. It's not like I'm super high on Pittsburgh. You know, I don't think they put forth an overly convincing effort on Saturday, but that's still a lot of points, you know, especially considering the total is 35.5. So, you know, a lot of faith in that Buffalo defense, or maybe just no faith in Mason Rudolph. I mean, this, like you said, this game started, I would say, no short of disastrous fashion for Buffalo. 2 picks on your first 2 drives. You know, one of those picks coming after you matriculated the ball all the way, you know, basically into the end zone. Josh Allen just kind of throwing it up for grabs, doing the same on the next one. The second one was just, you know, that was just the quintessential Josh Allen interception. Like somebody tweeted last night, like they should score Josh Allen interceptions right after, like a gymnastics routine. I would love that. That would have been like a 9.8. Yeah, just an unbelievable decision. Like I think it was, maybe if you're trying to defend him, like, you know, Gabe Davis did look like he got like pushed, or his feet got tangled up behind the play. The refs didn't call it. I love that they didn't call it, because sometimes they would. I mean, that ball absolutely deserved to be intercepted. Yeah. But the Bills found a way to rally, and you know, really, it was the punt return touchdown. Yes. Right at the, I think it was right at the end of the third quarter or early fourth quarter, that, you know, kind of sparked something for Buffalo, because right before that they had punted and they had fumbled on their previous 2 drives. Yeah, I mean, the sack fumble looked like it was like going to be, this is not their night, you know, and it's like, you know, you're getting all these passing yards from Allen, but nope. But, you know, they're just like the Eagles now in terms of like every 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, it's Allen running. And yes, it's effective. I get it. I don't think it's very aesthetically pleasing. Maybe I'm just a grouch now. I don't want to ban the tush push or anything like that, but I just don't want to see it like 17 times a game either. There's a happy medium. Now, that said, Allen had some amazing scrambles late. That 3rd and 11 scramble where he got the first down. I mean, there's like 3 quarterbacks that can do that. Him, Hurts, and maybe Justin Fields. And Allen's so big he can break tackles to do that. And same with Hurts, and that's the difference. Yep. Allen looked like he was going to be stopped 3 yards short and just kept going. Going. I mean, it was a 3rd and 13, actually. He ended up picking up 15 yards. There was a penalty on Ramsey anyway, but obviously Allen didn't know that at the time. I mean, that was really, to me, the play of the game. Obviously the punt return was huge. You know, the Bills scoring on the previous drive to actually go up. That was the pass to Dawson Knox. But, you know, you kind of felt like the way Miami had been moving the ball, you know, Buffalo had been a little bit shaky. It's like they really did not want to give it back to Miami with a real chance. And of course, they ended up doing that anyway. You know, with Miami taking over with about 210 or 150. I'm looking at the wrong drive on the clock, but that was huge to run time off for Buffalo. You know, kind of felt like at the time that might have been the end of the game, but you know, of course, Miami did have that chance, and thankfully, if you're a Buffalo fan, you know, Tua did his best to ensure that there was no scoring threat. Yeah, and there, you know, it was weird. Tyreek Hill wasn't in on that play. And they ran it to Claypool, and it looked like he maybe ran it too long, as far as the call. But McDaniel was very diplomatic. Said, I put them in a position there, or something like that. Tyreek Hill got kind of knocked around right before that, and you know, he had been, you know, it was kind of at the same time, it was kind of like, you know, the game's on the line here. I guess the season's not on the line because you're in the playoffs, but you'd much rather be home for a playoff game than at Kansas City on Saturday night.
and it's supposed to be like 14 degrees on Saturday night too, by the way. So that's going to be really interesting. But yeah, it was an odd juxtaposition. Now I think he got knocked pretty good on the play right before that. There, it was kind of the safety drilled him pretty good. So I get it that he wasn't in on that play, but still. I do agree with Buffalo's decision to go for it on 4th down because the game's over if they convert. Whereas if you kick the field goal, you still get 10 minutes. You got 2 minutes left. Weird things can happen. You may not make the field goal as like a 54-yarder. I think sometimes we announcers kind of start to assume the field goal for 50 yards because kickers are so good these days. But still, so I was fine with the decision to go for it there. We didn't even mention that like Buffalo got stymied right at the goal line at the end of the first half there. That was another weird play.
Very weird play. Yeah, I mean, they got, like you said, stuffed late. That was the big one. Got stuffed before halftime. We didn't mention with the Green Bay Chicago game too. We had a complete breakdown as far as leaving points on the field.
Yes.
Before halftime there, it was kind of similar to what happened to the Jags. I forget what game that even was. Was that the Cincinnati game? The Baltimore game? No, it was the Baltimore game. When they just ran out of time because he didn't get out of bounds, and we saw some kind of bizarre clock management this weekend overall. Yep. I will say, if you're Buffalo, obviously winning this game is big. You get up to the 2 seed, you get the home game, you avoid playing Kansas City. I kind of like the way this bracket is breaking down for them. I mean, not only do you get what should be the best matchup, I think the kind of one big outlier team to me in the entire postseason is the Steelers, where you're like, all right, you got in, but I think if you had to rank every single team in terms of danger right now, the 14 playoff teams, the Steelers to me would be number 14. So you feel great about that, and then you start to look like, okay, if Miami were to upset the Kansas City Chiefs, then they would automatically play the Ravens in the next round. And then you're looking at the winner of Houston and Cleveland. And I think if you're Buffalo, you're okay with that, right? You're okay with that matchup. And, even if it's Kansas City in round 2, they're coming to your place now for that game. Yep. Like, yep. I still, I have big time questions about the Bills. I don't think they're back. I think they've skated by and had some things really go their way over the last month or so. But I think the way this bracket breaks down actually is really favorable for them to at least get to the AFC Championship game.
100% agree. I mean, this did set up as good as it possibly could given the circumstances, and what a closing finish. I mean, not all these games are works of art, but I mean, winning 5 in a row, and still you had to do it. And let's face it, a lot of teams have fallen short of that. So, you're right. I think this sets up really well, and in retrospect, I'm not really even shocked at the number against the Steelers. But
no, I mean, Steelers are not a good team, and Kansas City, Miami is going to be a great game. Like you said, I think the weather in Kansas City that certainly plays into the Chiefs' favor. I think they want this to be a low-scoring game, but that is going to be a super, super fun matchup. I think we can't just think of the Chiefs in the same way that we have the last few years. Like, oh, playoff game at Arrowhead, they'll just win that. I mean, I don't think we can take anything for granted with them. And the Tyreek return to Kansas City, that's going to be awesome.
This is the all narrative game.
Dude, it's going to be so much fun. Yeah, I actually wish there was better weather. Like, normally I like these weird weather games, but for this one specifically, I wish it was like 55 degrees, no wind.
Yeah. And instead, we're going to get weather. We're going to get Tyreek homecoming, the Chiefs malaise, Taylor Swift, all these things coming in to the forefront all at once there. Oh, streaming only. Thanks. I hate that, by the way. I am so annoyed at that. Yeah. You don't mess with the playoffs. I know. I think that's sacrosanct.
Game time weather forecast, by the way, as of right now, this game is Saturday night. 10 degrees, 15 mile per hour winds at kickoff.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to may take a beautiful thing and ruin it. I mean, I think it's like the Dolphins' lot in life to play a cold weather road playoff game, though. It just seems like that's it. I mean, they can't get their home.
This is why the Chiefs always have the players wear those turtlenecks and the composite photos.
Yeah, exactly right. I don't think there's anything else to say about Chiefs Chargers or any of the other games that happened. It's just more just looking at these matchups there. So I think we've hit all of them too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have really a whole lot to say. Like, we were right on the Raiders. We knew there'd be some motivation there. We heard it before and after the game. These guys really want Antonio Pierce to get this job. I think that showed through. Yep. It was another pretty uninspiring performance by the Denver Broncos. No real fantasy takeaways there. I thought Arizona should have won against Seattle.
Yeah.
They ended up covering. That was big for the Circa contest. Ended up missing a field goal as time expired. That was a 51-yarder. But I think that game went about as expected. And obviously Seattle, in the waning moments of that game, kind of knew that things weren't going to break their way postseason wise. But that's another team that's at a crossroads. And, if you want to hear more on that, listen to us on Sirius XM, because we'll be kind of doing some off-season autopsies on a lot of these teams.
Yeah, exactly. Prater missed 2 field goals in that game too. That was that not just the last one there at the end, but kudos to both Seattle and the Rams for running 2-point conversion plays at the end. Win or lose, that was the smart,
Yep.
Overtime is just not an option at all there. So yeah, that was smart of them to do that there. Seattle, I mean, hey, they're gonna have some tough questions this offseason, so we'll see about that. Whether Carroll comes back, this is, they haven't won a playoff game, I think, for a while now. I think 2017, I want to say, it's the last playoff win for them. So it's been a while. So they're starting to kind of question where they're at. So we'll see. And in Arizona, they played hard as they've been doing for the last month. So kudos to that. I'm really looking forward to the playoffs. We're going to do a playoff draft on Sirius XM Fantasy on our show on Wednesday night. So looking forward to that. Any other reflections from this week before we sign off for today?
No, I think we hit exactly what we needed to hit. Like you said, listen to us, 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time. That's how I think of it. I don't know what other time zones people are dealing with. 7 to 9 Central, Monday through Thursday, Sirius XM Fantasy. We'll be talking all things NFL, mix in some baseball talk, some golf talk, some NBA talk every now and then. But obviously through the playoffs, we will be very NFL dominant, and we'll be keeping this podcast stream going throughout the offseason as well. We'll be a different schedule. We obviously won't be doing, weekend recaps every Monday, but we'll have plenty of content throughout the offseason. We'll be talking best balls, talking dynasty, things like that. So make sure you keep it locked in on the RotoWire Fantasy Football pod feed, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
All right. Before I let you go, I need a prediction tonight from you for Michigan and Washington.
I really, really, really want Washington to win this game. Okay. I'm a Wisconsin fan. Obviously, they've never really sniffed the national title of late, but I've really attached myself to this Washington team. I'm not somebody who roots for the Big Ten. If anything, I root against the Big Ten. So the number swelling to Michigan 5.5, that concerns me. I feel like I'm going to be let down. With that said, I'm taking Washington. I think the Huskies win what will be a relatively high-scoring game by Michigan standards. I will say 38-35 Washington.
All right. I hope that comes to fruition, because that would be just a hell of a game to watch. And that's I'm rooting for entertainment. That's my rooting interest. Actually, my mom went to Michigan, so I'll probably root for them. But I do understand the impulse not to reflexively root for your own conference, because let's face it, they don't really care about you. They don't care about it. It doesn't make Wisconsin look better just because.
Right. I get that if you're in like a mid-major conference, because like the amount of money that brings in, it's like the rising tide lifts all boats type of thing. No, Michigan winning does not in any way help Wisconsin, in my opinion. If anything, that gives them even more of a leg up than they already have. So no, I don't really care that much. It's not like I'm going to be like, slamming around items if Michigan wins this game, but Washington is just so fun, man. I mean, this is, I was telling my buddies the other night, I'm like, this is a team that if I was in 7th grade, I guarantee you I would have asked for like a Roma Dunze jersey for Christmas. Nice.
I love it there. All right. Well, that's going to do it. Thanks for everybody for listening, and thanks for listening all season long with our recap podcast. We'll still have regular podcasts that RotoWire will every week throughout even through the off season. We'll still have a lot of good stuff, but this is our last recap podcast. So thanks everybody for tuning into that all season long. Enjoy the playoffs, everybody. Take care.